Welcome, my name is Wojciech Bata, and after two native speakers, I am from Czech Republic, so English is my second language, and I would like to speak about quality as responsibility of whole team. But before we will speak about that process, I would like to at first define what quality itself is, because if we talk about quality assurance, we need to know what we would like to assure. And there are quite a lot of definitions, and you should choose one, or better, based on your knowledge and experience, you should build one, because it's really important to know what are you trying to achieve. And I always like to define quality by the mean of 4 levels. Then the first level is something like deliver according to requirement. And this is definitely not enough. This is very low level, and basically this is kind of monkey work. Basically, developers take something, they blindly implement it. We as testers take something, we blindly test it, we deliver it to the customer, and it's done. Said is that this is very common understanding of testing from managers, just verify that it works according to something. So, second level is to deliver according to correct requirements. So now we are basically in the time when monkeys start to think, and we start to ask questions, like what am I developing? Do I have everything what I need? And then sooner or later we ask ourselves the most important question, and it's why am I doing that? So basically now we are aiming to deliver value according to correct requirements, and we can demonstrate it on the user stories, for example, because user story has 3 main parts. As somebody, I would like to deliver something to achieve some goal, and actually the something part is the less important. The most important part is the goal which we would like to achieve, and to be able to implement desired solution, we need to know the persona why we are to whom we are delivering this solution. And it should have 4 levels. And the last level is to deliver value according to correct requirements when all stakeholders are satisfied and happy. So in other words, for me, quality is level of satisfaction of all stakeholders. And this is quite challenging, because satisfaction is a subjective thing. And stakeholders also, it's sometimes very hard to identify them. So I would like to demonstrate it in some hypothetical project, like something ideal, which never exists, but it's a good for examples. And before that, I would like to do a small disclosure, because people always ask me when I speak about ideal process, if I really do it in this way. And the answer is simple, of course not, because each project is different, each project has own challenges, but for me it's important to know what I aim for, and where I would like to be, to identify the way how to get there. And the project itself, it starts very far away from the start of the project, basically when the project is signed off. And the things can be really messed up when you are defining your contracts. And all projects now are still based on some contracts. And agile contract, this is maybe the topic for another call, but I would like to state only a few things which are really important from contract point of view. And the problem is basically that people, in the time when we are negotiating the contract, they do not understand agile, or sometimes even they experience with agile is bad, because previously somebody came there and they say, okay, we do scrums, it's easy, and they didn't understand that, and probably it was not delivered. So lessons learned from that is that you should never say to your customer that agile is easy, because it's a lie, and you should explain them that it's challenging. It will be hard for them, probably harder than sequence development, because then in sequence development on the start they define something, and after a year or 2 you deliver something, and then they need to do something like verification and so on. But now you are asking them to be involved daily with you, and they can be easily scared by that. So important is that you find out who are your stakeholders, and what are their responsibilities, and you explain them, and you offer the help with that, like, don't be scared, we will teach you how to do it. Only what we need from you is the commitment to really do it. And in our company, we have quite a good standard statement of work. But the problem is that really nobody cares about the most important chapters, because there are a lot of definitions, like what methodology are we going to follow, and what does it mean to work in sprint, what everybody should do, and so on. On the other hand, everybody cares about the scope. And yes, we have some high-level scope in our statement of work, but it's supposed to be kind of wish list. However, we work with big corporations, and they are used like, at the start I need to define everything, otherwise I will pay for that later. So they understand it as a commitment. And another problem is that despite the situation that statement of work, it's a legal document, everybody sign it, and then during the project we start pushing, okay, you commit to, let's have an example. For example, there is a statement that everything what we deliver in sprint 2 needs to be accepted or denied by customer in sprint 3. So basically they have 3 weeks to do it. And if this was misunderstood during the time when SOW was negotiated, now they struggle with it. And then we push like, you should do this and this and this, but then I have excuses even from my management, like, this is complicated customer or bad project and so on. We will have, our next project will be better. That's a typical answer. And it's kind of bullshit, because if you are not improving now, your next project will be the same or worse. So now let's assume that we have SOW sign off and there is some level of understanding, and we can start, and we always start with something which is called foundation sprint, and it's basically a period of time like 3 weeks, sometimes more weeks, before real implementation starts, when we would like to achieve some very clear acceptance criteria or output criteria from this period of time. When the first is that all stakeholders are identified and understood. And important thing is also to realize that also you are an important stakeholder, because if we define quality as satisfaction of all stakeholders, then also I would like to be satisfied with my daily work, because like typical project, it's like 6 months, year, and something like that, and I don't want to do 8 hours per day something I don't like or I'm not proud of. But then you will ask them the question, okay, very important stakeholder from testing point of view is your team, your testing team, who will test? And then after that question, usually there is a long silence, and then like, what are you talking about? Testing? That's your responsibility, that's your stuff. We are not responsible for quality, because then you are trying to push us to care about your responsibilities. And then process of working agreed. I don't know why, but usually when contracts are signed off, it's done by different people on customer side, sometimes even on our side, then the group of the people who will work with you then this 6 months, a year, and so on. So now you have the real group of the people, and you say to them, okay, after each sprint you should do this and this and this, and they say, no, 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 we were not aware that it's supposed to be agile project, we don't like it, and so on. And also high-level idea after foundation sprint should be clear, like we need to know what we are building, what is the main goal, for whom, and so on. And based on that, we should also have enough user stories to start next sprint, because start working only on high-level ideas, it's a suicide. And then the strategy should be prepared, reviewed, and agreed. So, as I said, this foundation sprint is a very good idea, but we are not so strict on this exit criteria. So I spoke about that the testing team on customer side is not identified, and so on, and so on, and so on. And if you have these problems, then you need to add another foundation sprint. But this is the biggest problem, because usually we have some deadlines and we have some rough estimates we will deliver in 10 sprints or something like that. And now, where everybody is prepared to start, you will say to them, hey, no, stop, another 2 weeks, we need to clear these things. Clever customers agree with that. Okay, we need to mitigate this. If you now start implementation, you will fail after second, third sprint. So there needs to be actions, and QAs can really help in this area with basically three main topics. First is this process, and the testing on the customer side. That's the most critical thing and most struggling thing, because this is something what they typically never do, and it's something new for them. So we should sit together with them, our QA lead or maybe whole QA team, and we should do some workshop, like explain this is the way how we work in the sprint. After each sprint we deliver some piece of work. It's defined in the user stories. User stories have acceptance criteria, and you should prepare some test cases, you should test it and you should accept it, and we can help you with these testing aspects, like how to test, what are the specifics and so on. And we only need a commitment that you will provide us with several people who knows the business and who can do it. And then the second part is requirements, because having user story as one sentence only, nobody can work with that. We need to have enough information for developers to develop, for testers to test, for product owner to accept, for customer to accept, and so on. And it really depends on your team. If you have a team of only senior people, then probably you need only some more details, some mock-ups maybe, and you are fine. However, if you have a team of juniors, then you need to have more details. And I found out that it's a good idea, if you have junior team from development point of view, to assign somebody really senior from QA point of view, because he will help to achieve these goals. Interested is that it doesn't work from opposite side. Like if you have team of senior guys and you assign a junior QA people there, they will not respect them. Interesting thing. And then the strategy defined. The strategy is kind of living document when you describe what and when and how you would like to do it. And the main focus of each strategy should be how we would like to prevent defects versus finding them later. And now let's assume that we met this criteria for a foundation sprint, and we can start our sprint work. And our typical agile team looks like something like that. We have a customer, we have some consultant who speak with a customer, he defines the requirements, and then developers develop it, QAs test it, and it's a nice circle, because agile loves circles. However, you can easily imagine this as a sequence, as a small waterfall, and that's the biggest challenge on any agile implementation which works in iterations or sprints, but even in Kanban and so on, that it's a sequence. Develop, test, and so on and so on. And the mitigation of that is simple. There is no test phase in agile at all. Testing is not a role, it's an activity which starts even before iterations. And to achieve that, you see that there is a lot of space for communication. And first communication which should happen, it's before the sprint itself starts. And there are two main regular activities which can help improve your quality. And first of them is grooming. And backlog grooming, it's a terrible word, but it's basically it's an activity when at least once per week you sit together with your product owner and he explains the new user story for you or changed user stories. And the main purpose of that is to achieve business understanding, that the team really understands what, but most important, why they are doing that. On the other hand, the team provides feedback to the customer or to the consultant, and they say, okay, we do not understand it. You are missing some acceptance criteria. Let's go and define together acceptance criteria. Or this is totally wrong because of something. And it's really interesting point when you have a whole team here and you have developers, because they very often, in the time when they start to understand the business, they will say, like, okay, but we can do it in another way. It will be more simply, more easy, and less risky, and so on. So this feedback is very good here. But this grooming idea, it looks very easy and there are a lot of challenges. And first challenge is that it's not happening regularly. And most typical case why it's not happening regularly is that there is simply nothing to be groomed. And the typical problems here are like your product owner, he is so overloaded because maybe you have so big team, like if you have 10 people in your team and only one product owner, then he has no chance to prepare too much thing for next sprint to have work for all of your people. But another typical problem in grooming is that it's like voiceless sessions. Yes, 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 we understood it. Sometimes something in the middle is only QA yells and questions the requirements, when developers, they are more used to work in this old way, like give me good requirements with all the details, and then I will develop it when it's the time, and they don't want to think about building the bridge if you are like 10 miles from the river. But then it can easily happen that you came to the water and it's a lake and you don't need a bridge, you need a boat. So you should involve everybody here. And then, after grooming, when you have a business understanding, there is the second ultimate activity, which is sizing. And sizing is agreement about complexity and risk of the user story, and basically you should provide some number. And it's really often done in this Fibonacci numbers, like playing a poker, but it can be done also in like t-shirt size, and maybe it's more descriptive, because numbers people tend to transfer to hours, like 8 user story points are typically 8 hours, and that's a way to help if you need to say like this is a small, this is a big, this is very big, and so on. This will help you. But most important is that here should be team agreement. And very often, story points provided by QAs and by developers are quite different. And then they need to talk each other and they need to explain, okay, I think that this is complex because there is this risk and so on. And then developers get understanding. Sometimes it's even in opposite, like we think, yeah, easy piece of cake, and they say, but it means to rework this and this and this and this. So we will have an agreement how big the user story is. And then we can start the sprint, and each sprint should start with a planning session, which is basically the activity when we take user stories, we break them down to tasks, and each task is assigned to responsible person who will really do it. By that we have kind of personal commitment which built our team commitment, but here we need to estimate somehow, and estimated there was a nice talk in the morning about test estimation, and estimation itself, it's tricky because it's kind of science and you need to understand it. So at first everybody underestimate. Everybody been there like, yeah, it's easy, and it's not. And then another consequence of that is that we overestimate. So basically we say some guess, like 8 hours, 16 hours, typically you see that it's like multiplication of 8 hours, and we add some significant buffer to don't be losers again because we underestimated. But then it has no point, so sooner or later you should find out some formula which works for you, and I always use the formula, it's like optimistic plus realistic plus pessimistic divided by 3, and then estimating takes more time, but I need to consider all possibilities, like, okay, if everything goes well, then theoretically it's 4 hours. Realistically, based on this project, this experience, this team, it should take like 10 hours, and if things goes wrong, then you think about all of these possible scenarios, what could happen, then it's 20 hours, and then you divided the sum by 3, and you have an estimate which in average will work for you. And so let's assume that we plan the sprint, and we can start to work. And now, before developers start, there is another possibility to talk each other, and I call this expectation agreement. And it's really simple session, like 10 minutes, not more, for critical and complex requirements when the topic is to talk each other, and usually QA starts, this is the way how I will test it, this is how I understand the acceptance criteria, and so on. And developer, he can explain basic implementation, but most important here is that they will agree who will test what, because developers, they should test. They should test a lot of, and if we agree here, like before I say that this is done, I will test this and this and this, we will avoid this situation like they deliver something and after 5 minutes I found critical defect and I can push it back and it takes days to finish any user stories. And so now developers, they can start working. And during that phase, we have a lot of work to do, but the most important is to support others, because there should be close cooperation between developers and QAs on each task. They can ask the questions, and sometimes even we can do pair programming, by the mean that like a developer is programming and I am looking to the code, not on the opposite way. It will not work. But senior QAs, they should be able to read the code, they should be able to comment it, and you will catch a lot of defects during this phase. And then we should prepare test cases, but test cases, it's kind of tricky. They should have right level of abstraction. And basically I said that always like steps are optional. You don't need steps if you understand the user story to test it. If you do not understand the user story, then you should not test it at all. And there are very often bad motivations for test cases. And it's like to demonstrate that it was tested, but actually it's a lie, because we just demonstrated we spent a lot of time preparing and maintaining test cases instead of real testing. And second can be like training materials for customer. Again, you should use something else for that. And now we are in the phase when developer thinks he is finished, but before he push the code for us to be available to test, we should sit together again and we should do some handover to QA. And this is basically the time when now it's up to developer to demonstrate, hey, I did this, I implemented this, and most importantly, I tested this as a scope of my functional testing. And even here, we often can ask them, show me the code, because sometimes reviewing the code with comments from developer, it's like 10 times quicker than to test it later in UI or whatever. And by this, before even our testing start, you can find a lot of defects. You don't need to report them anywhere. You avoid this ping-pong in tracking system. You just say, hey, fix this and this and this. Then after an hour, you repeat it. Yes, now I am satisfied, and now I can test. So now I'm really in the phase when I test. So yes, we still test. We do functional testing, exploratory testing, all of the cool stuff, but it's only a small part of our daily work. And you should not find too much defects here, because you prevented all of them by these activities. And it's kind of nice measure, because if you found a lot of defects here, then you are doing something wrong. And then you should have internal demo. Let's say after each week, each Friday, you sit together with the whole team and you demonstrate what was done. And this is very important for pricing consultant or product owner, how to call him, because usually he struggles to provide you with regular acceptance. They do like acceptance last week of the sprint, but then if they found something, you have no chance to react for that. So by internal demo, you can achieve regular acceptance from your product owner. And then of course, then by the end of the sprint, there is a demo to customer, where you should take as much opportunity from this to get as much feedback as you can. And you can also speak about the problems, like share the failures. And after demo, we have a retrospective, which retrospective, it's the most important thing in agile process. You should talk about what went good, what went wrong, but you should plan actions for everything, because if you do not plan any action for something you identify in your retrospective, then it's kind of crying session only, because you will repeat the same things next time. So now we finished the circle, and it was really a circle because we prevented a lot of defects by communication. But there is one big question mark, and it's like, where is the customer? Because he was on the demo. And should we invite him to all of these activities? In 99% this is not a good idea because it will not be effective. You basically need to make your customers available for you whenever you need. It means like if I call you now, you will get me answer like in 10 minutes or something like that. And this is really challenging because by that you need to have decision makers on customer side. Like I would like to ask question and after the call I would like to have answer, not waiting week that you need to discuss it with some other groups. So this is mainly involvement from requirement perspective. But I spoke about customer testing. And customer testing after each sprint, it's mandatory because my experience with demo is that after demo you have feedback like it looks fine or it doesn't. But feedback like looks fine, that's not acceptance. And we would like to have regular acceptance after each sprint from the customer. So basically their test team or some business people, and it's better to have business people because you would like to achieve acceptance from business point of view, they are one sprint behind us. It means like we delivered the code and now they need to accept it, and sooner or later they will recognize that this is advantage mainly for them because they can provide the feedback, and if they do, if they say after like a week it was implemented that they would like to change something, it's cheap. Basically we can do it in the next sprint and they will be happy because they cannot predict the entire solution in advance, and this will provide them with possibility that we will really react to this change. And last thing is that I was thinking how to visualize my job, especially to my wife because she is not IT person, and then I draw picture like that, and I was quite, the hard thing of that was to choose these words because yeah, there is this big testing. Yeah, we test a lot of, and you cannot succeed if you do not test. But there are plenty other things which means quality assurance, and that's like business understanding, requirements, feedback, and supporting others. And I think that the supporting others is the most important because sometimes we are called as a people that QAs, we would like to criticize everything. And that's not true, but we would like to provide feedback on everything. And sometimes it's not welcomed, sometimes it's even our fault because we maybe do not choose our words properly and we say, yeah, developers, they have a lot of defects and customers, they don't know what to do. But if you aim to support them and to help everybody else, then maybe it's not a problem that you didn't test something if you support others during their work. And then naturally they will start doing things like, hey, I would like to test it myself, just help me with that. So this is testing for me, or QA for me, not testing for me, but quality assurance. And that's all. And now it's time for questions.
Hello, my name is Vladimir. First of all, thank you for very interesting point of view on our profession. But your view differs from the classic view when testing is a process of discover defects, which is heuristic. Your vision looks like more like coaching of people. But when you do coaching on when you apply it to the people who are interested in the result, it is easier to achieve it. But when you will try to teach somebody, stakeholders, customers, developers, and others, you can meet the resistance from them, and how to handle it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and let's have developers as an example. Even in my company, we still, like, when I'm assigned to my first project with new developer, he always says something like, you would like me to test everything instead of you, I don't need you anymore. And I say, yeah, so let's try it from a different point of view. On the first sprint, we try classic approach, like I test. Then it's not hard to find like 60 defects per day. And then I said to him, okay, and if we cooperate, if we share testing, if you understand it and so on, there will be like 10 defects after next sprint. Okay, it will take more time, but now you need to fix these 60 defects, which I found. Maybe if we invest the time of fixing to prevent them, it's better. And then, I don't know, I think that a developer who has a lot of defects in his code, he's a loser. And if he, on the other hand, our managers, they really often evaluate testers like per numbers of defects I found. But for me, a tester who found 60 defects per day is a loser too, because he allowed developer to make them. So yeah, it's like evolution to really have a smaller number of defects and then work on this satisfaction of customer. Because if you deliver something to the customer and there are really not too much defects, and most important, there is this value, because even if you deliver something which is according to requirements without defects, but there is no value, then nobody will use it. Then a customer will push for this process on your projects. And yeah, we do not start in a sprint 1 with this process. Mostly it's like after sprint 3, we are there in this process we would like to do.
Hello, I'm Anna, and my question is pretty similar to the previous one. I experienced such thing as very passive involving developers in grooming. When they need to discuss something they would do in 2 weeks, they are very passive. And what are the ways to involve them? What particularly you use?
Most of our developers, they're like gaming and so on. So we made from our groomings, we did it as a game, like, hey, and now we need to agree. And if developers, they do not speak too much, then they should speak as first. Basically, when you have a poker and everybody raise the hand with his number, then maybe change it that at first developers will raise the hand, and then they will start to think about it more, because then they will be the first, everybody else will challenge them. And on the other hand, you can make their life very hard if they are not on the grooming thinking, and then they should estimate, and then they should say 8 hours. You can ask why, what you will do exactly, and why you are doing that, and how you will test it, and make them answer all these questions. And next time they will be on the grooming, because they don't like to answering these questions, and if they understood, then they will not answer them.
Hi, my name is Lydia. I have the following question. I really like the idea of constant involvement of business. Unfortunately, it's even though they know it's going to be cheaper if we fix it quicker and so on, there still can be two problems. One of them is that they're still constantly busy. Another problem is that sometimes they change their mind. So you said, but my question is a bit different. It's you said that the feedback for them is usually like pass or fail. So they say it's okay, or no, it's not okay. So it's not formal, it's not full, and so on. But do you actually ask them to, formally sign off when they test during that sprint, which is one sprint later than your sprint? Do you ask them to tell you what exactly they were checking? Because sometimes they do not know themselves what to look at. But you, as a QA, you may know that, for example, this I cannot actually sign off as a QA because, for example, I come from Deutsche Bank, so we have a lot of numbers that we need to calculate pricing and so on. And it's sometimes like one person in the business who can tell you if this number is correct or not. So yeah, the question is, do you hold them responsible for what they tell you in that sprint, and do you ask them what exactly they did in that sprint?
Yeah, interesting question. So basically, at first we need to build a trust with customer. And I spoke about test cases, that sometimes they would like to see our test cases to trust us that we test it. So no, we involve them and we will show them how to test it. And sometimes if they do not trust me, I use recording tool, like 8 hours per day. I record my screen and then send send it to them, they can look. But then after this sprint, yes, there is sign off that basically in our planning tool, there is last state of the user story is that they accepted it. But I don't want to them to do same things as I do. They need to trust me that this number is correct. But they should evaluate it in their flows, like, okay, and I have this number there, and maybe they can prepare some basic inputs for that to see that in high level it works, but for them the most important is the number is here, it shows something, and then they can discuss with Adu. Okay, I see the number, it looks fine, can you show me how you test it? And then of course I need to show them we test this scenario, this scenario, this scenario, and this scenario, and then you build this trust. But I aim for them to accept from different point of view, otherwise it has no value. Like typical one of our customers, they ask, give us your test cases, we choose some of them and we will execute it ourselves, and then what is the value? I already did it. So yeah, it's a different point of view and we should trust each other, but yeah, they lose the point. Like we usually deliver something, and if they do not react, then they will react by the end, and then they will pay for another year of development to implement their changes.